I was underneath the starboard hull when it began. Just another Tuesday or so, I thought. The welding torch hissed in my hand, casting flickers of orange light across the cold steel. My back ached, my gloves were damp with sweat, and my helmet visor fogged slightly with each breath. I was halfway through patching a stress crack on a rusted trawler we'd been working on for weeks. Then the static came through the work radio. At first, I didn't notice. The guys joked and talked over it as usual. But then there was a sudden silence, and I saw Frank, big guy, 2 decades on the job, pull off his helmet and lean toward the receiver. "Turn it up," he said. Someone did. Repeating, "All citizens are urged to remain indoors and avoid contact with infected individuals. Symptoms include extreme aggression, fever, and unresponsive behavior. Head trauma is the only known method to neutralize." I yanked my helmet off. What the hell? Everyone gathered around the speaker. There was another burst of static, then a different voice, calm, clinical, like it was reading from a script. "Believed to be a mutated strain of rabies. Spread occurs through bites or contaminated blood. Martial law has been declared in several regions." I didn't wait to hear the rest. My stomach turned. I tossed my torch aside, ripped off my gear, and sprinted toward the locker room. My thoughts were a whirlwind. My wife, Myra. Our 2 kids. Olivia, just 9. Sam, barely 5. They were home alone. I had to get to them. Now. "Rob. Rob, where you going?" someone shouted. "Family," I barked. "You should all go, now. This ain't no drill." The drive home was chaos. Sirens screamed through the streets. People ran in all directions, some with duffel bags, others with weapons in hand. I passed 3 car accidents in under 5 minutes. One guy had a bloody baseball bat and waved it at me like a lunatic. I swerved. I kept trying to call Myra. No answer. I prayed she had turned on the news. I prayed she had packed a bag and was ready when I got there. I floored it down Elm Street, heart in my throat, eyes scanning every shadow. I didn't see my neighbor until he stumbled right in front of the truck. I hit the brakes hard. He turned, face pale, mouth twitching. Blood dripped down his chin. He looked wrong. His eyes locked onto me, and he sprinted straight at the hood. No hesitation. I threw it in reverse, tires screeching. He leapt onto the hood. His face smashed into the windshield, cracking it. His teeth scraped against the glass like a nightmare. Then crack. A shovel swung from the side. It was Myra. The man slid off the hood in a slump. I leapt out. "Myra. Are you okay?" She was pale, shaking, but alive. I saw him chasing someone. He bit Mrs. Calder. I had to. The kids are in the back seat. I rushed to the rear door. Olivia clung to Sam, both terrified, wide-eyed. I hugged them tight, heart thudding. Then I looked to Myra. "We're going back to the workshop." "What? Isn't home safer?" I shook my head. "The workshop has thick walls. Tools. Food stock from the break room. Welding torches. I can turn it into a fortress." She hesitated, then nodded. "Let's go." We didn't make it 3 blocks before we hit our first real nightmare. A man was dragging a girl down the street by her hair. At first I thought it was just violence panic, maybe, until I saw her bloody legs and the way he gnashed at her throat. I grabbed the crowbar from under my seat. Myra stopped the car. "Rob, don't," but I was already out. I ran at him yelling, and he turned. His face, God, his face was torn up, eyes rolled back, teeth gnashing like a wild animal. He charged. I swung the crowbar hard. It hit his shoulder, but he didn't even flinch. I swung again, this time, higher. It hit squarely in the temple. He dropped. The girl crawled away, moaning. I helped her into the back and bandaged her leg best I could. Her name was Kara. She was 17, and alone. "You're coming with us," I said. She didn't argue. The supermarket was next. We had one shot to get supplies. The place was chaos. Shelves overturned. People screaming. Blood on the linoleum. I told Myra and Kara to grab canned goods and bottled water. I headed for batteries, radios, first aid, anything useful. Then the screaming got louder. A horde 6 or 7 infected barreled through the shattered front doors. People scattered. One of them grabbed a man and bit straight into his cheek. I could hear the tearing from across the store. I gripped a steel wrench tighter and charged. I smashed one from behind, then another in the neck. It didn't stop them. The brain. The radio had said the brain. I aimed higher. One by one, we fought them off. Myra threw a canned ham at one and knocked it over. Kara used a broom handle. I brained two with a wrench and nearly vomited. But we survived. Barely. We loaded everything into the truck and got the hell out. We reached the shipyard just before sunset. I parked the truck inside and slammed the workshop gates shut. Reinforced them with chains and steel rods. The others sat in silence as I welded sheet metal across the lower windows. Sparks flew. Sweat soaked through my shirt. But it felt right familiar. Safe. That night, we slept on old cots in the corner, the radio crackling in the background. No messages. Just static. But we were alive. And I swore to keep it that way. The first night was the hardest. Every sound outside made us jump. The occasional distant scream, the clatter of something falling, even the wind against the steel siding, each one stabbed into our nerves like a blade. I barely slept, sitting with my back against the wall, crowbar resting across my knees, ears tuned to the radio's low static. Myra curled up with the kids on one of the canvas cots, clutching them like she could hold the danger at bay with sheer will. Kara sat nearby, staring at nothing, her bandaged legs stretched out. The place smelled like oil, rust, and metal shavings, my world. I'd spent more hours here than at home over the years, shaping steel, breathing sparks, welding strength into something that floated. Now, I was counting on it to keep us alive. By morning, I had a plan. I started early, dragging sheet metal, welding panels over weak points, stacking tool cabinets against doors, and sealing off the skylight with a steel plate I scavenged from a decommissioned boat rudder. The workshop had thick walls, a wide concrete floor, no windows at eye level, and only 2 entrances. I blocked the front gate with a forklift, jammed the controls, and dropped the loading platform to act as a barrier. The back I sealed entirely with welded plates. When I was done, the place felt like a vault. For food, we had enough for a week or so: canned soups, rice, crackers, jerky, some bottled water, and a few gallons of gas station milk Myra had grabbed during the chaos. We had flashlights, 2 small generators, batteries, and basic medical supplies. It wasn't luxury, but it was survival. I inventoried everything, made lists, checked expiration dates. Myra helped organize. Kara took care of the kids when I was busy. She didn't speak much, just nodded when spoken to, but I saw her watching, always watching. Maybe she was trying to figure out if I could really keep them safe. On the second day, I taught Olivia how to hold a wrench, not for repairs, for defense. I showed her where to strike, how to keep her balance, what to aim for. She was young, but sharp, and I needed her brave. Sam stayed close to his mom, drawing stick figures with chalk on the concrete floor. I watched him sketch a smiling sun, a house, a dog. There was something devastating about how normal his pictures were, like his little brain hadn't caught up to the reality outside yet. I was grateful and heartbroken at once. I gave Myra a crowbar. "You sure you'll be okay with this?" I asked. "I'll do what I have to," she said. I believed her. We spent most of that second day reinforcing everything. I pulled spare steel rods from the storage cage and welded a crossbeam across the inside of the main door. Every loud clang or weld sparked an echo that made the kids flinch. But every bolt I tightened, every hinge I reinforced, made me feel a little stronger. Like I could actually beat this thing, not just survive, but fight it. We set up a watch rotation. Myra and I took turns staying awake, one of us always near the radio, always listening. That night, while Myra slept with Sam and Olivia tucked against her, I sat beside Kara. She hadn't asked for anything, not food, not help, not comfort. She just sat, her eyes fixed on the flickering workshop lights, her leg wrapped in a bandage we'd made from an old welding jacket. "You got family?" I asked. She didn't answer at first. Then, quietly, "Not anymore." I didn't push. I just nodded. "You're one of us now. We protect our own." That was the first time I saw her blink like she might cry, but nothing fell. The radio finally spoke that evening. A woman's voice, soft but strained. "This is Emergency Broadcast Station 104.3. All government facilities in this region have been compromised. Evacuation centers are no longer safe. Do not approach hospitals. If you are uninfected, shelter in place. Help may be coming." The transmission repeated twice, then silence. We all just stood there, staring at the radio. The voice had sounded so defeated. I could feel the pressure building in Myra, the fear, the uncertainty. "What do we do when the food runs out?" she asked. I looked at the shelves, then out at the red sky beyond the welded windows. "We ration. We plan. Maybe we scavenge later. Right now, we survive." That night, we dimmed the workshop lights and used only one hanging lamp to conserve power. The kids were already asleep, and I sat on the floor, fiddling with a broken radio I'd found in the office cabinet. If I could get it working, we might pick up other signals. Maybe another survivor. Maybe someone who had more answers than a single grim broadcast. Myra came over and sat beside me. Her hand found mine. "You were right," she whispered. "This place, it feels safe. I don't know how you saw it that fast." "I've built ships, I said quietly. "I know what floats. And what sinks." She leaned her head on my shoulder, and for a while, we just sat like that in silence, surrounded by steel and shadows. For the first time since the world cracked open, I felt like maybe we had a real shot. Day 3 started with silence, the kind that makes your skin crawl. No birds, no wind, no distant cars. Just dead air. I woke early, stiff from the cot, my legs sore from crouching and welding for hours the day before. Myra was already up, boiling a small pot of instant oats on the portable camp stove I'd found in the supply room. The kids were still asleep, curled up on a pile of old blankets in the corner. I gave her a tired nod and quietly walked over to the workbench by the main entrance to check the barricade again. The forklift was holding. I jammed the tires with metal rods, welded a brace across the inside gate, and tied a warning bell rig above the outside, a bunch of nuts and bolts in a steel tin that would rattle if the chain link was disturbed. It hadn't made a sound all night. Still, I didn't trust it. Nothing about this world was trustworthy anymore. Around mid-morning, Kara helped Olivia organize the food supplies. She was moving slowly, her legs still bothering her, but she insisted she was fine. I appreciated that she was trying. Sam wandered over to the tools, fascinated by the wrenches, bolts, and solder wire. I warned him not to touch anything sharp, and he nodded like he understood. But he was 5. I made a note to lock the cabinet later. Just as I was tightening the hinges on the reinforced front door, we heard a banging noise from the south wall. Not loud, but distinct. Like someone lightly thudding a fist against steel. Everyone froze. Myra instinctively pulled Sam and Olivia close. Kara grabbed the broom handle we'd sharpened into a makeshift spear. I moved slowly toward the wall, crowbar in hand, stepping softly. The banging came again, 3 times, then silence. Then again. I climbed up onto a work table, looked through a slit I'd cut in one of the upper panels to serve as a lookout. Outside, 2 figures stood near the gate. Human. Alive. I could tell by the way they moved, slow, cautious, not the jittery, erratic lunging of the infected. They were elderly. A man and a woman, maybe late 60s or early 70s. The man held a blood-stained gardening hoe. The woman clutched a small duffel bag to her chest. They looked exhausted. Behind them, further down the lot, 3 infected were limping toward them. The older man turned and tried to wave them off, yelling something I couldn't hear. The infected didn't stop. "Open it," I said. Myra looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "What?" "Rob, I'll let them in." "Just them. You all stay back." I unjammed the bracing bar, pried open the edge of the gate just enough to wave the old couple through. "Get in now," I shouted. The woman didn't hesitate. She rushed forward, ducking under the partially raised gate. The man followed, slower, swinging his hoe as one of the infected lunged. He knocked it aside, but another grabbed his jacket. I charged forward and swung the crowbar hard, smashing the infected skull in. It collapsed instantly. The third one turned toward me, mouth open, stumbling fast. I didn't wait. I struck it square in the forehead and felt the sickening crunch. The man stumbled inside, panting, blood on his hands but none of it his. I yanked the gate down and shoved the bracing bar back into place. The tin bell rattled and stilled. "Thank you," the man gasped. We didn't know where to go." I nodded, out of breath myself. "You found the right place. Come on. Let's get you inside." Myra had already prepared blankets and a water bottle for them. The kids stared wide-eyed, unsure whether to be scared or relieved. Kara sat back down slowly, still gripping the spear. We gave the newcomers a spot near the corner, where they could rest. Their names were Harold and June. They'd lived in a house just down the highway, heard the news late, and tried to wait it out. Then last night, their neighbor broke through their back door, eyes milky, mouth soaked in blood. They escaped through the side yard and had been running ever since. They were shaking, Too tired to talk much. I kept thinking about what would have happened if I'd hesitated. If I'd let fear make the decision. I'd killed 2 more of those things today. Their faces still burned into my memory. I could feel the crack of their skulls echo in my bones. But if that's what it took to keep my family and now these 2 strangers alive, then so be it. That night, we shared some canned soup. I gave Harold a spare pipe wrench to keep nearby, just in case. June prayed over her food before eating. I hadn't heard a prayer in years. It was oddly comforting. Later, as I sat on the workbench staring out at the empty lot beyond the gate, Kara joined me. "You could have left them," she said. "You didn't." "They needed help," I replied. "So did you." She nodded once, then added, "You didn't leave me either." I turned on the radio. Same voice as before, this time weaker. "Remain indoors. Do not seek evacuation points. If you are healthy and safe, stay where you are. A solution is being developed." Repeat, "A solution is being developed." I looked at my hands, used, scratched, the skin around my nails blackened from welding and grime. I never imagined these hands would be used to kill. But they were also keeping us alive. And maybe that's what survival was now: blood on the steel, hope in the silence. By the 4th day, the workshop felt less like a prison and more like a bunker. Every corner had purpose now. The metal shelves Myra and I had bolted to the walls were no longer just cluttered with bolts and marine parts, they were organized stockpiles of survival. Canned food grouped by type. Water bottles lined in order of expiration. A first aid station had taken shape under my old workbench, with every bandage, antibiotic, and alcohol pad we could find neatly tucked into plastic bins. It was Myra's idea. "If someone gets bitten, we need to be fast," she said. I didn't correct her. We both knew bites were death. But we played along with the idea of treatment because it was easier than facing the alternative. Outside, the world remained quiet. Too quiet. That eerie kind of stillness that made you think the worst had already happened, but it hadn't. It was still coming. Every now and then we'd hear a cry, a scream, distant gunshots that echoed through the industrial zone. Sam would flinch, clutching his stuffed bear like it could block out the sound. Olivia was braver. She would ask me what each noise meant. I answered honestly, but gently. Someone fighting. Someone running. Maybe someone trying to help. She never looked away when I told her. Just nodded, like she was cataloging it all in her mind. Harold was recovering from exhaustion. June helped Myra clean what little we had, always folding the blankets, always putting things back in their place. They were strong, the quiet, dependable kind of strong. That afternoon, we all sat in a circle and shared stories. I asked Harold what he used to do. "I was a mechanic," he said with a weak smile. "Fixed old tractors. Made more money keeping things from falling apart than ever making them new." June chuckled. "And you always overcharged Mr. Ellison." "Because he was a cheapskate," Harold muttered. I laughed for the first time in days. Even Kara cracked a faint smile. It was strange, almost dangerous, how comforting it felt to laugh. Like letting your guard down in a storm. Still, it reminded me we were human, not just survivors. Later that day, I decided to test the perimeter again. I climbed up the scaffold that led to the roof access, one of the few places I hadn't fully sealed yet. I'd left a small opening just big enough to see the road beyond the yard. What I saw chilled me. Smoke. A lot of it. Not drifting lazily like a chimney fire, this was thick, black, rising fast and far to the west. Something big was burning. Maybe an evacuation center. Maybe a city block. I stared through the gap for a long time, trying to make out shapes, people, anything. Then I saw them. Infected. A group of 6 or 7, walking down the center of the road with that awful twitchy stride, stiff but somehow fast. Their heads jerked side to side like they were sniffing out noise. One of them trailed what looked like a torn jacket still attached to a severed arm. I climbed back down and sealed the opening tighter. That evening, I didn't say anything about the smoke. Not yet. I needed to think. Instead, I focused on our defenses. I spent 2 hours reinforcing the gate from the inside with a steel crossbar I welded to anchor points in the wall. If anything broke through the forklift, I wanted at least one more barrier. Myra helped me stack boxes and welding tanks behind the inner door. We were building a dam against a flood, and every bolt counted. After dinner, just crackers and canned beans that night, Olivia pulled out a set of colored pencils she'd stashed in her backpack. She began drawing on the back of old inventory printouts. I watched her sketch our little crew, the 7 of us sitting around a fire. Everyone had smiling faces. The sky was blue. Even the workshop behind us looked like something out of a fairy tale, not the rusting fortress we now called home. She handed it to me shyly. "This is for when we forget to smile again," she said. I didn't have words. I just hugged her tight. That night, I took the first watch. I sat by the gate with the radio low and the crowbar beside me. Kara joined me a few minutes later. She handed me a half-empty energy drink she'd been hoarding. "I figure you earned this," she said. I nodded, took a sip. "Thanks." She leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. I saw my brother turn. First he was sick. Then he tried to bite me. I locked him in the laundry room and ran. Her voice didn't tremble. It was flat, like a confession from someone already numb. I didn't know what to say. So I just said, "You did what you had to." She nodded. "I know." After a while, she went to sleep. I stayed by the door, staring at the shadows outside. Around midnight, I heard another sound. Faint, metallic. Like something brushing against the outer fence. I stood, crowbar ready, and listened hard. Nothing more. But it had been real. I was sure of it. Someone or something had passed close to the edge of our world. I didn't wake the others. Instead, I tightened the grip on my weapon, turned the radio up just enough to catch the signal loop again, and waited for the sky to turn gray. By sunrise on day 5, I had counted exactly 3 more fence noises. Always faint. Always passing. But unmistakable. Something, or someone, was out there, close. I hadn't said anything to the others yet, no sense stirring panic when we didn't know if we were being watched or just passed by. Still, it pushed me into action. I started drawing up a layout of the workshop's interior, a crude floor plan sketched on a ripped sheet of welding schedule paper. Every table, shelf, and fuel tank was marked, every possible weak point circled in red. I stared at the drawing like it held the key to everything. If we had to make a stand inside, I needed to know how long we could last and where we'd break first. Harold caught me staring at it that morning and shuffled over, still groggy. "Looks like battle plans." "They are," I said simply. He scratched at his beard. "You ever serve?" "No," I replied. "But I build ships." "You think about flooding, weak bulkheads, stress points. That's not so different from fending off zombies. He gave a dry laugh. Guess every man becomes a general when death's scratching at the door. We split into teams after breakfast. June helped Myra wash and reuse what little we could: dishes, clothes, even old plastic containers. Kara and Olivia organized the makeshift tool armory. I had gathered everything blunt, sharp, or heavy enough to bash in skulls: pipe wrenches, rebar chunks, sledgehammer heads, a dozen makeshift spears welded from scrap, and broomsticks. I sharpened edges using the grinder in the corner, sparks flying like angry fireflies. Every strike on the wheel felt like I was hammering out fear. In the back lot behind the workshop, we had a few abandoned shipping containers. I hadn't gone through them since day one. With Kara watching my back, I pried one open and found a stockpile of rusted steel coils, leftover rebar, and 2 old welding tanks. Jackpot! We dragged them inside, sweating through our shirts in the heat. One tank was low, but the other had pressure. I could use it for torch defense if needed, a last resort flame trap near the gate. Not pretty, but it would scare off anything flammable. While we worked, Kara kept glancing at the lot. "You really think they're coming?" "I don't know," I said, adjusting the regulator on the tank. "But we should prepare like they are." She nodded, then added, "If they do, I won't freeze." She said it like a promise. Inside, June started coughing. Not a lot, but enough for me to notice. Myra noticed too. "Just dust," June assured us. "Too much rust in the air." "I'm fine." But it still made my stomach turn. The line between a normal cough and something worse was thin now, and I didn't have the tools to diagnose anything. I gave her a mask from the welding cabinet and a bottle of water. "Better safe than sorry," I said. She smiled, but her eyes didn't match it. That afternoon, Olivia asked to help weld. I hesitated. She was just 9. But she was serious, that kind of serious only kids get when they're terrified and want control. I let her hold the torch while I guided her hands, my gloved fingers wrapped around hers. We practiced on scrap, tacking pieces together. Her lines were messy, but they held. "Good," I said. "That'll stop a monster." She grinned, proud, even if just for a moment. Sam had started building a little world out of old bolts and washers. A miniature city near the tool rack. Every piece had a name. "This is you," he said, holding up a rusted nut. "You're the wall." I knelt beside him and looked at his strange creation. "And what's that?" I asked, pointing to a tall stack of washers and clamps. "That's home. Nobody gets in there." I gave his hair a gentle ruffle. "Good job, buddy. Keep it safe." The radio crackled that night. A new voice. Male. Shaky. "To anyone who can hear this, there's a small group of us in the hillside apartments. We're holding out, but food's running low. If anyone has supplies or knows what's happening, please respond." Channel 5. Then static. Kara and I exchanged a glance. "Hillside's only 4 miles from here," she said. "Yeah," I muttered, rubbing my temple. "But it's 4 miles through hell." I didn't answer the radio. Not yet. The others needed rest, and I needed time to think. If we started helping others, even good people, we'd need to risk exposing ourselves. But if we didn't, we were no better than the things we feared. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked the workshop perimeter again, double-checking the bolts on every panel. The stars outside looked dead, no moon, no glow, just black sky over a blacker world. Still, something in me kept moving, kept welding, kept planning. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were building something. A wall. A home. A purpose. And if anyone came to break it, infected or not, they'd find out real fast what a welder with nothing to lose could do. The seventh day inside the workshop began like any other, cold coffee cooling on the workbench, the stale smell of sweat and oil thick in the air, and the low hum of the radio struggling through static. I was hunched over the welding clamps, tightening one loose bolt, when Myra's sharp whisper sliced through the quiet. "Rob, I think we've got visitors." My head snapped up. The kids were huddled in a corner, clutching each other tightly. Kara stood near the back door, her eyes wide and scanning every shadow. I tightened my grip on the crowbar in my hands and crept cautiously toward the front gate. The faint metallic rattle we'd been hearing for days was back, louder, more frantic. Like something was clawing and scraping desperately at the chain-link fence. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I thought I might throw up. "Everyone, get ready," I hissed, voice low but urgent. "This might be it." Myra didn't hesitate. She sprinted to the makeshift armory and handed me a pipe wrench, her hands trembling but steady. She took the crowbar from me without a word and moved toward the front door. Olivia and Sam disappeared under a heavy workbench with June, their faces pale and eyes wide with fear. Kara was standing in the shadows, holding a sharpened broomstick spear, ready if needed. I moved to the reinforced gate and pried open the upper panel window, peering out. 10, maybe more, infected were shambling outside, some dragging broken limbs, others slick with fresh blood. Their eyes were dull and milky, yet filled with the single, terrible purpose of hunting prey. "They're going to break the gate," I muttered under my breath. "We can't let that happen." I slammed the panel shut and backed away. "Myra, barricade the door again." I turned to Harold and June. "Help me with the welding rigs." Sparks flew as we ignited torches and heated steel bars, pounding heavy beams into place across the gate's inside frame. But it wasn't enough. The infected pounded and shoved harder, their guttural moans rising in pitch, turning to snarls that echoed off the workshop walls. One slammed his body against the gate so hard the whole building shuddered. I heard the cracking of splintering wood and the groan of bending metal. Then, a loud crash. The forklift arm snapped under the pressure. The gate gave way an inch. My breath caught in my throat. "Hold it!" I shouted, pushing with every ounce of strength I had. The crowbar scraped the floor, sparks flying. Myra swung the pipe wrench with brutal force, smashing the nearest infected square in the skull. Blood sprayed across her face, but she didn't flinch. Harold and June grabbed wooden pallets from the yard and jammed them into the growing gap. "Keep them out!" I yelled. The infected surged forward, snarling, snapping their jaws inches from our faces. I grabbed a welding torch, feeling the heat in my palm, and lit the flame to a leaking propane tank nearby. The hiss was immediate and deafening. I threw the tank toward the gate and dove back as it exploded in a fireball. The blast lit up the workshop like daylight, the heat scorching our skin. The infected screamed and writhed in the flames, their bodies turning to ash in seconds. Silence fell. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Myra stood slowly, wiping blood from her eyes, chest heaving from exertion. "Is it over?" Olivia peeked from under the workbench and nodded hesitantly. "For now." We gathered in the corner, shaken but alive. The fire had destroyed some of our supplies, fuel tanks, food cans, but it saved our lives. I counted heads carefully. All 7 of us were still here. For now. The kids were terrified. Their small bodies trembled against mine. I pulled them close and whispered, "We're safe. We're okay." Myra sat beside me, hands shaking as she cleaned the cuts on her arms with water. "We can't stay here much longer," she said softly. "They'll come back. Bigger numbers next time." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I know. We need a plan." Looking around the battered workshop walls blackened by soot, barricades splintered, I realized how fragile our sanctuary was. The walls I'd welded, the gates I'd reinforced strong, yes, but not invincible. Supplies were running dangerously low. Food was rationed tight, and every day felt like walking a knife's edge between life and death. That night, I sat by the radio, the only link to the outside world. Static filled the silence until a faint voice cut through. It was a man, shaky and tired, speaking of a vaccine in development. The hope in his words was fragile, a distant promise through a storm of chaos. I let the message repeat again and again, as if by hearing it more, I could anchor that hope in my bones. Myra joined me, sliding into the chair beside me. "Do you really think it's real?" she asked quietly. I didn't have an answer. But I squeezed her hand and said, "I want to believe it." Sleep came fitfully that night. Every creak and whisper outside made me jump. The workshop felt both like a fortress and a cage. We were safe, but only for now. And tomorrow? Tomorrow was a question I couldn't yet answer. The morning after the fire felt heavy, like the air itself was thick with the weight of what had happened. I woke up stiff and sore, the ache from sleeping on the cold cot settling deep into my back. Myra was already awake, carefully heating the little water we had on the camping stove, making weak tea for the kids. Their small figures huddled together in the corner under the workbench, shadows protecting them like a fragile fortress. Kara sat against the far wall, her legs still wrapped in bandages, eyes distant but sharp, always alert. I moved first to inspect the front gate, the epicenter of last night's chaos. The explosion had left its mark: blackened metal, twisted edges on the fence, burnt scraps stuck like grotesque trophies to the wooden pallets wedged into the gap. The smell of burnt propane mixed with the metallic tang of blood and sweat hit me like a punch. I wiped my hands on my shirt, trying to shake off the nausea that threatened to rise. Killing to survive was becoming a new, harsh reality, and it settled on my shoulders like a lead weight. Harold and June were already up and moving, quietly helping Myra tend to her cuts. Harold's experience as a mechanic shone through as he rewelded bent bars, patched holes with scrap steel, and worked silently but steadily. I handed him my welding mask without a word, grateful for the extra pair of hands that meant the difference between holding on and falling apart. "We can't hold this forever," Harold said quietly, breaking the silence. "They'll come back, stronger, in bigger numbers. We need to move or get more supplies." I nodded, my mind already racing through the possibilities. The small pile of food and fuel we had was enough to last maybe another week if we rationed carefully, but that was a grim timeline at best. "I'm planning a run to the supermarket," I said. "It's risky, but we have to try. If we don't find more food and fuel, we won't last." Kara leaned forward from her spot against the wall, her voice steady despite everything. "We need to get the kids out if it gets worse. Somewhere safe. I don't want them to die trapped in the steel cage." Myra looked at me, worry deep in her eyes. "But where? The roads are crawling with infected, and the radios only carry static and desperate calls for help." I stared at the scratched metal walls, where the fading glow of the workshop lights bounced off rusted surfaces. We keep building. We keep fighting. That's all we can do. The kids stirred then. Olivia shyly handed me a drawing she'd made on the back of an old inventory sheet, crude stick figures holding hands inside a circle of steel bars. Above it, she'd written, "Safe place." My throat tightened. She was still hopeful. For their sake, we had to be, too. The day passed slowly. I spent hours reinforcing the barricades, welding metal plates over weak spots, stacking heavy toolboxes behind doors, rigging a noisy tripwire that ran from the workshop entrance to the storage room. Every creak, every distant shout, every clink of metal made me flinch. Nothing came close, but I knew it was only a matter of time. As dusk fell, we gathered for dinner canned stew, crackers, and some stale bread from the supermarket run. The quiet was almost sacred. The kids turned old welding gloves into puppets and made up stories. Harold hummed a tune from his mechanic days, and even Kara smiled faintly for the first time in days. Then the radio crackled to life. A calm, authoritative voice broke through the static, steady and clear. To all survivors, this is the Central Emergency Network. A vaccine has been developed and is in production. Distribution points will open within the next 72 hours in secure locations. Stay tuned and stay safe. Myra's eyes filled with tears. I squeezed her hand tight. "It's coming," I whispered. "Maybe this nightmare will end." But the hope was fragile. The infected were still out there, the world was broken, and each day was a fight to hold on to what little we had left. That night, lying on the cold concrete floor, I made a silent promise to myself. Whatever it took, I would protect this family. I would keep them safe. I would survive not just to live, but to see that glimmer of light through the rust. The morning light seeped through the cracked windows, dust dancing in the shafts like ghosts. It was day 9 inside the workshop, and the weight of confinement was beginning to press down on us all. Myra had cooked a thin porridge from the last of the oatmeal, and the kids ate quietly, their eyes still haunted by the night before. I sat at the workbench, cleaning the welding torch, my mind racing with the plan I'd been thinking about all night. We needed supplies desperately, and I knew that meant risking the trip back to the supermarket. But this time, I wouldn't go alone. Kara volunteered first. "I'm coming with you," she said, voice steady. "I'm faster than you, and I know how to fight." Myra looked at her, worry flickering behind her tired eyes. "It's too dangerous," she said softly, "but I know you can handle yourself." I nodded in agreement. Having Kara with me felt right, a fighter who'd stood beside us since the beginning. Harold offered to help too. "I'm slow with this leg, but I can cover the rear and carry supplies. If something goes wrong, you'll need backup." June insisted she was coming as well. "I'm not much good with a weapon, but I can patch wounds and help carry." I looked at them all, my ragtag crew, and knew that splitting the family would be hard. But survival meant risks. We prepared carefully. I sharpened spears and repaired the crowbars. Myra packed a small medical kit, and we rationed water and canned food for the trip. Sam and Olivia clung to us, faces pale but nodding with understanding. I promised I'd be back soon, though I wasn't sure if that was a lie or a vow. The door creaked open just after dawn. We moved fast, shadows slipping through the morning fog that had settled over the empty streets like a shroud. The city was silent except for the occasional groan of a distant infected or the flutter of debris in the wind. The supermarket was just over 2 miles away, a long walk by normal standards, but an eternity in this new world. The streets were chaos. Cars abandoned mid-ride, windows smashed, and shelves overturned in the stores. We had to keep our wits sharp. Every noise could mean danger. We stayed low, using side alleys and back entrances to avoid open spaces where infected might lurk. I led with my crowbar, Kara close behind with a makeshift spear, Harold scanning the rear with a rusty hunting rifle he'd scavenged early on. Inside the supermarket, it was worse than I'd feared. People had panic-stripped the shelves, leaving only bare metal racks and empty crates. The smell was rancid spoiled food mixed with decay. Infected wandered aimlessly among the aisles, groaning, some twitching violently, others shambling slowly with dead eyes. A few had clearly died recently, their bodies rotting where they fell. Kara and I moved quickly, grabbing canned beans, bottled water, and medical supplies. I found a box of welding rods and a new set of gloves. Harold and June stayed close, ready to cover our backs. The tension was thick, every second counted. Then a sudden crash echoed from the far aisle. A pile of cans tumbled as an infected lurched into a shelf. The moans rose sharply, and several others stirred. "Move!" I hissed. We hustled toward the exit, carrying what we could. But the gate slammed shut behind us. Someone had triggered the automatic doors. Infected began converging fast. I swung my crowbar, smashing one in the skull, feeling the sick crunch as the weapon connected. Kara stabbed another with the spear, twisting hard to finish it. Harold fired the rifle, a loud crack that echoed through the store, and June tended to a cut on my arm from a clawed swipe. We broke through a side door and sprinted into the parking lot. The sun was rising higher, the light turning the carnage into a grim tableau. A horde of infected began to converge on our position, drawn by the noise. We piled into a battered van Harold had found and pushed the doors shut, panting, hearts hammering. The engine coughed but started. We peeled out, tires skidding on cracked pavement as we sped back toward the workshop. The drive was tense. Every shadow outside the window made me grip the steering wheel tighter. We kept low profiles, avoiding main roads and sticking to side streets where possible. When we finally pulled into the lot, relief washed over us. We'd made it. Back inside, Myra helped unload the supplies. The extra food and medical gear felt like a lifeline. We ate in near silence, exhaustion dragging us down. But the hope was there, a small flame burning brighter. The radio crackled again with updates about vaccine distribution points and survivor safe zones. It felt like the nightmare might be ending. That night, as I lay awake listening to the quiet, I thought about the road ahead. We were battered, scared, but still fighting. And as long as I had breath, I'd keep welding steel, building walls to protect my family until the world could be whole again. The morning after our supply run, the workshop felt both more alive and more fragile than ever. The fresh food and medical supplies brought a burst of energy to the group, but beneath it all was a quiet tension that clung to the air like rust on steel. I woke early, my muscles sore from the previous day's sprint and fight, but the weight of responsibility pressed heavier than any ache. I had to make sure this place could hold not just for us, but for the kids, for Myra, for everyone who had come to rely on this battered shell of a workshop. I began the day with a thorough inspection of the barricades. Every weld, every bolt, every wooden plank that had been jammed into cracks was scrutinized under the flickering workshop lights. I knew the infected would be back. They always came back. But this time, I wanted to be ready. I spent hours grinding and welding, patching weak spots with scrap metal and reinforcing the steel plates where the gate had buckled. I was building a fortress but also a promise. A promise that we would not fall quietly. Myra found me during a brief break, wiping sweat from my brow with a dirty rag. She carried 2 cups of steaming coffee, which she handed to me with a tired smile. "You've been pushing yourself too hard," she said softly. "You need to rest." I shook my head, the familiar stubbornness settling in. If I don't do this, who will? The truth was simple: if I didn't keep working, none of us would last. But I appreciated the concern all the same. She sat beside me, her eyes scanning the walls and barricades. "I know you're scared," she said quietly, "but you don't have to carry it alone." I looked at her, the woman who had stood beside me through it all, whose strength had kept us going. "I'm scared every day," I admitted. "But I'm not giving up." Myra nodded, squeezing my hand before standing to check on the kids. Olivia and Sam were busy playing quietly with makeshift building blocks, their laughter a fragile shield against the darkness creeping around us. It was moments like those that made me want to keep fighting to make sure they had a future beyond these walls. June and Harold, ever resourceful, were tinkering with a plan to rig a rainwater collection system. Using the workshop's old gutters and some large barrels we'd scavenged, they hoped to capture enough water to ease the constant worry over our dwindling supplies. Water was life, and every drop counted. While they worked, I turned my attention to something I'd been thinking about since the last attack: an inner wall. A second barricade, steel and wood, built deeper inside the workshop as a final line of defense. If the outer gate ever fell, this wall would buy us precious time, maybe even save our lives. I measured and cut steel plates, welding them into place, stacking heavy toolboxes to reinforce the structure. Every inch I added felt like laying bricks for our survival. The hours slipped away as I toiled, the steady rhythm of the grinder and the sharp spark showers a strange comfort amid the chaos. It was a language I understood: metal and fire, strength forged in heat. I was building more than walls. I was building hope. Late in the afternoon, as the fading sun cast long shadows across the workshop floor, the radio crackled to life again. The familiar static gave way to a different message, clear and authoritative. Vaccines are being distributed at designated centers. Survivors are urged to stay indoors and avoid large groups. Help is coming. Stay strong. There was a pause, then a faint melody drifted through the static, an old lullaby, soft and comforting, like a whisper from a world long lost. Myra's eyes filled with tears as she clutched my arm. "Do you think it's true?" she asked. I swallowed hard, the weight of hope mingling with doubt. "I want to believe it," I said. "We have to." That night, sleep was elusive. I lay on the cold concrete floor, muscles tense and mind racing. I walked the perimeter again in my thoughts, checking every bolt and welded seam, imagining every possible way the infected could breach our defenses. The silence outside was unsettling: no groans, no shuffles, no distant screams, but that only meant they were waiting, lurking just beyond the shadows. Kara joined me quietly, sitting down with a sigh. Her leg was healing slowly, but her spirit remained unbroken. "We can't keep this up forever," she said, voice low but fierce. "But I'm not giving up." Her determination was a spark in the darkness. She was right: we were running on borrowed time, but we weren't beaten yet. We had to hold on, for the kids, for Myra, for everyone who still believed in a future beyond this nightmare. The children slept soundly that night, their breath soft and even. I held Myra's hand, feeling the steady beat of her heart grounding me. In that fragile moment of peace, I made a silent vow to keep building, keep fighting, keep welding these walls. Not just for protection, but for hope. For survival. For a chance at something better. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, and new battles. But for tonight, we had each other. And that was enough. The days inside the workshop were folding together like pages in a worn book, each one filled with the same rituals, the same anxious waiting. We'd fortified the walls as best we could, rationed the dwindling supplies, and clung to the fragile hope carried in the crackling radio. But deep down, I knew it wasn't enough. The infected weren't just outside. They were a constant shadow lurking at the door of our lives. On the morning of day 11, I woke early again. The cold concrete bit at my back, but I refused to stay in bed. There was work to do. The inner wall I'd built felt solid, but I wanted to strengthen the workshop's perimeter even more. I had an idea, something risky, but necessary. I decided to build a secondary escape route, a hidden exit through the back storage room that led to the alley behind the building. If the main gate fell, we needed a way out. I called Kara over, and she agreed to help despite the pain in her leg. We spent the morning cutting through an old wooden panel that covered a small utility door in the back storage. The wood was thick and brittle, but with the grinder and crowbar, we made progress. The smell of sawdust and rust filled the air as we worked side by side, the sun filtering through grimy windows, casting long shadows across the floor. June and Myra helped by organizing supplies, labeling cans and medical kits, while Harold was out in the yard reinforcing the workshop's gate with welded steel plates. Every sound, a creak, a distant shout, the soft groan of the infected made my skin crawl. The world beyond these walls was broken, dangerous, and hungry. Mid-afternoon, the radio crackled again. This time, the voice was different, urgent and panicked. All survivors, quarantine zones are being established. Movement outside is strictly prohibited. Reports of infected breaking through defenses in multiple locations. Stay inside. Stay silent. The message repeated several times before fading into static. Myra's face drained of color. They're closing in, she whispered. It's only a matter of time before they come here again. That night, the unease settled over us like a heavy fog. We kept the lights low, shadows pooling in every corner. The children were quieter than usual, their eyes darting at every noise. I sat with them, trying to keep their spirits up, telling stories about the ships I'd worked on, tales of strength, resilience, and survival. Around midnight, a sudden crash from the front gate jolted me upright. The others stirred, alert and tense. I grabbed my crowbar and moved toward the noise, heart pounding. Through the small window, I saw movement, figures shuffling and pounding, the unmistakable groans of the infected echoing in the dark. Get back! I yelled, retreating to the inner wall. Myra secured the door behind me as the infected began to batter the front gate again. The sound of metal clanging against metal filled the workshop, each impact reverberating through my bones. We stood shoulder to shoulder, weapons ready. The barricades groaned but held. I welded a temporary brace in place, the sparks lighting the room like fireflies. The infected snarled and clawed, relentless, but every time they got close, Myra or Kara swung with fierce precision, ending them one by one. Hours passed in a terrifying blur, a symphony of grinding metal, shouted warnings, and the sickening thud of crowbars connecting with skulls. Exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced myself to stay alert, knowing that if I faltered, everything would be lost. When dawn finally broke, the groans faded. The workshop was battered but intact. We counted heads again, all 7 still alive. The kids were shaken but unharmed, their small hands clutching whatever weapons they could find. I sat heavily against the wall, breathing hard. Myra joined me, her face streaked with sweat and dirt. "We can't keep doing this," she said quietly. "We need help." I nodded, knowing she was right. But outside these walls, help was scarce, and every step beyond was a step into the jaws of death. That morning, I made a decision. I would use the hidden exit we'd built to scout the nearby streets for survivors, supplies, or any sign of organized resistance. It was dangerous, maybe foolhardy, but staying here, trapped and waiting, wasn't living. It was only surviving. I prepared a small pack, a crowbar, a welding torch, water, and some canned food. Myra kissed me quickly, fear and hope mingling in her eyes. "Be careful," she whispered. "Come back to us." Kara and Harold insisted on coming along, refusing to let me go alone. We moved quietly through the hidden door, slipping into the gray dawn that was neither day nor night. The streets outside were eerily silent, the aftermath of chaos etched in every broken window and abandoned vehicle. As we ventured further from the workshop, the weight of the world pressed down on me. But in the faces of Kara and Harold, I saw the same fierce determination burning bright, a promise that we would fight for whatever future we could carve from this wreckage. We didn't know what awaited us beyond the walls. But we would face it together. The morning air was thick with silence, not the kind that comforts, but the kind that presses heavy, reminding you that life as you knew it has been twisted beyond recognition. Kara, Harold, and I slipped out through the hidden exit, hearts pounding in rhythm with cautious steps. Behind us, the workshop's battered walls stood firm, a small island of safety amid the crumbled city. The streets stretched out ahead, empty and lifeless, littered with debris and the hushed echoes of a world gone mad. Cars lay abandoned, their windows shattered, doors left swinging in the wind. Storefronts were smashed, signs torn down or faded beyond legibility. Every shadow held the possibility of death, and every sound, no matter how faint, made me freeze. We moved low and slow, sticking to alleys and side streets, keeping close to walls and avoiding open areas. Our weapons felt heavier than ever, a crowbar, a spear, a rusty hunting rifle, but they were all we had. I checked the small pack on my back one more time: welding torch, spare gloves, canned food, water, and the medical kit Myra had packed with trembling hands. The plan was simple but risky: scout the area for supplies, survivors, or any signs of organized resistance. The radio's message about vaccine distribution had sparked a flicker of hope, but out here, hope was a fragile thing. We needed proof. Our first stop was the pharmacy. If there was a place that might hold medical supplies beyond the basics we'd scavenged, it was there. The front door was hanging off its hinges, shattered glass crunching underfoot as we slipped inside. The stale scent of chemicals and rot hit me like a punch. Shelves were overturned, some empty, others holding a few scattered bottles and boxes. I grabbed antiseptics, painkillers, and some syringes. Harold found a small pack of antibiotics tucked behind the counter. Every little thing counted. Suddenly, a soft shuffle from the back room. We froze, weapons raised. Kara crept forward, spear pointed, while I moved toward the door with the crowbar ready. The back room was empty except for a trembling figure crouched in the corner. "Please," the voice was barely a whisper. "Don't hurt me." It was a woman, ragged and scared, eyes wide with disbelief at seeing living people. We lowered our weapons slowly. "You're safe," I said. "We're survivors, like you." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Her name was Leah. She told us about her group, a small band of survivors holed up in a nearby church. They'd been hiding for weeks, struggling with food and water shortages. She asked if we could help. I looked at Kara and Harold. The decision wasn't easy. Helping others meant risk. But it also meant we weren't alone. We left the pharmacy with Leah, moving cautiously toward the church. The city around us was a graveyard, empty streets, dark windows, the smell of decay everywhere. The sky was heavy with gray clouds, and the faint drizzle began to fall, cold and relentless. At the church, a few survivors greeted us warily. Faces etched with fear and fatigue, but also with a flicker of hope. They shared what little food and water they had. Leah's group was small, maybe a dozen people, mostly elderly or injured. We talked late into the afternoon, sharing stories of survival, loss, and desperate hope. They had heard rumors of safe zones too, but nothing concrete. Their supplies were running out. We promised to bring back what we could. As dusk fell, I realized how far we'd come, how much this world had changed. The church was a fragile haven, a flicker of light in the endless gray. But even here, danger lurked. On our way back, we took a longer route, avoiding main roads. The streets were quieter, but the silence was broken by distant snarls, infected, always hungry, always hunting. We moved quickly, breath shallow, weapons ready. Back at the workshop, Myra greeted us with tears and relief. The kids ran to me, clutching my arms like I was the last solid thing in the world. That night, as we gathered around the radio, the voice came again, clearer this time, speaking of vaccine shipments delayed but still coming. Hope was fragile, but it was alive. I looked at my family, at Kara and Harold, at the tired survivors from the church settling in for the night. We were broken, battered, but still here. Still fighting. And I knew no matter what the world threw at us, we'd keep surviving. Because survival was more than breathing. It was hope, it was fight, it was love. The days after our return from the church passed in a blur of exhaustion and relentless preparation. The workshop, once just a place of work, had become our fortress and our home, a steel cage protecting us from a world that had turned to ash. The faces of the survivors we'd brought back haunted my mind, especially Leah's, pale, hollow-eyed but still burning with quiet defiance. We had promised to help them, but help was scarce, and the line between hope and despair grew thinner with every passing hour. Myra kept the children close, shielding them from the harsh truths of our reality. Olivia and Sam tried to pretend this was just a long, bad dream, but their questions cut through the silence like shards of glass. "Daddy, when will we go outside again?" Olivia asked one evening, her voice soft and trembling. I swallowed hard, unable to give her the answers she wanted, the answers I didn't have. "We'll go outside when it's safe," I told her, forcing a smile I didn't feel. "I promise." But promises were fragile things. I spent every waking moment working to strengthen our defenses. The workshop's walls were reinforced with welded steel plates, but I knew that wouldn't hold forever. I rigged makeshift alarms from scrap wire and cans, set traps around the perimeter, and taught Kara and Harold how to weld and repair in case I was away. Everyone had a role. Everyone was a weapon. Despite our efforts, the silence outside was ominous. The infected were lurking, waiting for any chance to breach our sanctuary. Every creak and groan of the building sent jolts of fear through me. Nights were the worst, the darkness swallowing everything, making the infected's moans sound like ghosts creeping through the shadows. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Myra and I sat outside the workshop for the first time in weeks. The air was cold and sharp, carrying scents of rain and decay. We didn't speak much, words felt useless, but just being together was a small comfort. Suddenly, a distant scream shattered the quiet. We both froze. The sound was raw and desperate, cutting through the night like a knife. It came from the direction of the church. Without thinking, I grabbed my crowbar and shouted for Kara and Harold. We had to know what was happening. Myra grabbed the medical kit, fear flashing in her eyes but determination in her grip. The walk to the church was a nightmare. Shadows stretched and shifted, every corner threatening an ambush. The air was thick with tension, and my heart hammered as we neared the battered doors. Inside, chaos reigned. The survivors were fighting off a sudden attack, infected swarming the perimeter, desperate to break in. People were shouting, trying to keep calm as weapons clashed and bodies fell. We jumped into the fray, crowbars and spears swinging. I fought with a brutal fury, every strike fueled by the need to protect my family and these strangers who had become part of our fragile community. Kara was a whirlwind of strength and speed, taking down infected with precise blows. Harold covered our backs, firing the rifle with deadly accuracy. The battle raged for what felt like hours. When the last infected fell, the church was bloodied but standing. We counted the survivors, some injured, some lost. Leah was among them, clutching a bleeding arm but alive. Back at the workshop, we tended wounds and shared what little food we had. The attack was a harsh reminder, safety was an illusion. We were fighting a losing battle, but we had to keep fighting. That night, as I lay awake listening to the quiet breathing of my family, I realized the weight we carried was more than just the infected outside. It was the burden of survival, the constant fear, the impossible choices, the hope that kept slipping through our fingers. But we were still here. Still fighting. And as long as I could hold the welding torch, I would keep building our walls inside and out to hold back the darkness. By the time dawn broke, the fires were close enough for us to taste the smoke in our mouths, even inside the sealed workshop. Ash rained down like a gray snowstorm, coating the window sills, clinging to our clothes, and turning everything outside a dull, lifeless white. What used to be the street beyond our gate was now a scorched ruin. I stared at it from the upper window, jaw clenched, heart heavy. Myra came up behind me, slipping her hand into mine. "We can't stay here if the fire shifts direction," she whispered. "You know that?" I nodded slowly. She was right. If the wind turned against us, no amount of steel walls would save us. We'd suffocate inside our own shelter. That was the terrible irony of the fortress I'd built with my own hands, strong enough to keep the monsters out, but also capable of becoming our tomb. We held a meeting just after breakfast, what passed for breakfast these days, anyway. A half tin of beans, split 7 ways, and a mouthful of water each. Leah, still recovering from her infected bite and stitched up by Myra, sat quietly while Kara spread out a roughly drawn map on the welding table. "We've got 3 options," Kara said. 1. Stay here and pray the fire dies before it reaches us. 2. Head down to the river using the back alley path we cleared. Or 3. Take the long route toward the evacuation zone we heard about on the radio. "Option 3 is suicide," Harold said. "That part of the city's crawling with infected. And we don't even know if that message was real or just someone playing a loop." Myra looked over the map and then to me. "What do you think?" I didn't answer immediately. My eyes went to Sam and Olivia, sitting quietly in the corner. They'd grown up too fast these past weeks. Childhood should have been filled with laughter, not screams. Toys, not weapons. We wait, I said finally. We stay put one more day. Watch the wind. If it turns, we take the river path and get out. No matter what. That decision was harder than it sounded. The rest of the day was spent preparing for evacuation, packing supplies into old duffel bags, double-checking the alley escape, loading tools and fuel into a small wagon Harold had modified to roll quietly over cracked pavement. I even packed a few welding rods. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I'd still need to build something out there, wherever we ended up. As we packed, the radio came alive again. The voice was faint, distant, but unmistakably real this time, not a loop, not static. This is Central Response Channel. We repeat, safe zones are operational. Vaccines are being distributed under military protection. Survivors are advised to seek extraction points marked by green flares. Do not attempt long travel on foot. Stay put. Help is inbound. We all stopped what we were doing. The children looked up. Myra's breath caught in her throat. Kara dropped her knife mid-sharpening. Green flares, Leah repeated. You think they're close? We haven't seen anything, I said. But the skies have been full of smoke. Kara stood. Then we go to the roof. I climbed the ladder first, emerging into the smoke-choked daylight. The ash burned my eyes. I raised the binoculars we'd salvaged weeks ago and scanned the skyline. They're just barely through the haze and smoke. A faint green glow. My heart leapt. Southwest, I said, pointing. It's about 4, maybe 5 kilometers. We could make it. But the fire, Myra reminded me. If it shifts, then it's death either way, Kara said, grimly. But that flare, that's real. We have to try. Back inside, I looked at everyone, my family, our new friends, our tired, stubborn little band of survivors. Tomorrow, I said. We leave at dawn. We aim for the flare. The rest of the night, no one really slept. I worked in the dark, reinforcing the wagon, sharpening tools, sealing the packs with tarps in case we had to run through water or flame. Myra sat with the kids, telling them stories about the stars, about a world that wasn't always like this. Leah helped Harold bind his sprained ankle tighter. Kara cleaned every blade with the methodical calm of a soldier preparing for one final mission. Outside, the firelight painted the sky red. But for the first time in weeks, a new light had joined it, a green one. Faint, yes, but steady. A promise that someone was still out there. And we were going to find them. We left just before sunrise. The air was thick with the smoke of dying fires, and ash drifted through the streets like a second snowfall. Each of us carried what we could: tools, water, food, weapons. The children wore makeshift masks Myra had sewn from old cloth to protect them from the soot. I'd welded a steel sled with wheels barely held together by rust and hoped to haul what remained of our supplies. We couldn't afford to leave anything useful behind. The green flare in the distance was still faintly visible, its glow just piercing the thick morning haze. That's where we were headed, toward the only signal of life we'd seen that wasn't trying to kill us. Stay close, I whispered to the group as we began our march. No sound. No lights. If you have to drop something, leave it. We don't stop unless we have to fight. The streets were eerily quiet. The fire had burned out much of the nearby neighborhood, leaving behind scorched skeletons of homes and storefronts. What wasn't charred was soaked from the emergency rains that had come in the night, black puddles reflecting a gray, broken sky. About an hour in, we passed a playground, the swing set creaking in the breeze. Olivia paused there, staring at the burned plastic slide, her eyes wide. "I used to play on one of those," she said softly. I crouched beside her, putting a hand on her shoulder. "You will again," I said. "Soon." We kept moving. Around the next corner, we heard them, not groaning, not yelling, but sniffing. Clicking. That strange guttural sound we'd learned to fear more than anything else. The infected. They were just ahead, maybe 5 of them. One was crawling, its legs twisted backward at the knees. Another wore a tattered postal uniform, its face torn down to the bone. They hadn't spotted us yet. We ducked behind a burned-out SUV, holding our breath. Harold looked at me. "We can't go around. Too narrow. We fight." I nodded once. Caro led the charge with her spear, fast and quiet. I came behind with the crowbar. Harold held the rear with the rifle, but we saved bullets unless absolutely necessary. The fight was quick but brutal. One of them lunged for Leah. She drove her boot into its chest and I crushed its skull before it hit the ground. We didn't speak afterward. We just kept moving. The closer we got to the flare, the louder the city became. Gunfire in the distance. A scream. A vehicle engine somewhere far off. We weren't alone. That brought hope and danger in equal measure. We passed through a small park littered with burned tents and abandoned supplies. A makeshift camp now long empty. Some of the bodies were still there, curled in final positions beneath tarps. "Don't look," Myra told the kids gently. They didn't listen. But they didn't cry either. They were past that now. By midday, we reached the outer edge of the flare's location, an old stadium, ringed with barbed wire and guarded by sandbags and barricades. Green smoke still drifted from the flare launcher atop the gate tower. And on the wall, people. Real people. Armed, alert, alive. A soldier spotted us. "Hold position," he barked through a bullhorn. "Do not advance." We froze. "We're uninfected," I shouted. "We have children." A moment's pause. Then the gates opened just a crack and 2 soldiers in hazmat gear emerged, rifles raised. They scanned us. Asked questions. Checked for bites. We passed. Barely. Inside, the stadium had been converted into a makeshift quarantine zone. Rows of tents, generators humming, food lines guarded by soldiers. And in the far corner a medical tent flying a white flag with a red cross. That's where we saw it. The vaccine. Small vials, carefully refrigerated, guarded like gold. We had made it. After weeks of blood, ash, and steel, we were here. We had survived. That night, for the first time in what felt like forever, I sat with my family in relative safety. We ate real food. Drank clean water. Watched Olivia and Sam laugh with other children. Myra sat beside me, her head on my shoulder. "We're going to be okay," she whispered. And for once, I believed her. They stripped us of our clothes the moment we were inside. Decontamination, they called it. I didn't argue. None of us did. After everything we'd been through. A cold chemical spray and a 10-minute scrub under fluorescent lights seemed a small price to pay for not dying in the street. The soldiers didn't speak much, but they were efficient. Professional. One of them, a tall man with a face hidden behind a mask, looked at Olivia and handed her a blanket. She's freezing, he said quietly to Myra. And for the first time in weeks, someone helped us without expecting anything in return. We were placed in an isolated section of the stadium compound, a quarantine ring of white tents just outside the main survivor area. They gave us clean clothes, ration packs, bottled water, and basic bedding. A nurse checked our vitals. Myra was fine. The kids were exhausted but healthy. Kara's leg needed treatment, and Leah's infected wound, though already healing, was tested immediately. We were told the results would take a day or two, but if she showed any symptoms before then, she'd be moved to isolation. Permanent isolation. I'm not turning, Leah said, clutching the side of her cot. I feel tired, but I'm me. I'm still me. And she was. Her eyes weren't sunken. No fever. She helped distribute the rations that night, talked to the children, kept her distance, but she smiled. That meant something. The next morning, we woke to the sound of helicopters overhead. A distant thrum, steady and mechanical. I stepped outside the tent and looked up at the gray sky. They were dropping more supplies, food, medicine, even generators into the inner compound. There was order here, and it felt strange. For weeks we'd lived in survival mode, every hour unpredictable, every moment a question of life or death. Now we had a schedule. A clipboard told us when meals were served, when we'd be tested, when we could leave our section. It should have brought comfort. But it made me restless. Feels too easy, Kara muttered that afternoon, as we watched soldiers walk the perimeter with rifles and dogs. Like we're waiting for someone to tell us this was all a mistake. I don't care, Myra said softly. Let it be easy for once. That evening, we were called into the medical tent one by one. Blood tests. Oral swabs. Temperature checks. They took my fingerprints, my ID, what was left of it, and issued me a plastic tag for my wrist. You're clean, the doctor said. All of you. All of us? I asked. The doctor nodded. Leah too. She was lucky. Her immune response was strong. She might even be useful for synthesizing broader vaccine strains. Leah smiled when we told her. That small grin, worn and crooked, felt more powerful than the entire quarantine fence. But I couldn't shake the feeling of weight. Even surrounded by security and supplies, there was an emptiness in me. A silence. Later that night, I walked to the fence line. A guard eyed me, but didn't stop me. Beyond the chain-link barrier, I could see the burned city, the broken streets, the ash drifting like ghosts. That's where we'd survived. That's where we'd fought. And now we were here. Safe. And I didn't know what to do with that. Myra found me by the fence, arms crossed, watching the night. You haven't stopped moving since we got here, she said. I don't know how, I answered. She touched my arm. We're not running anymore. I don't know how to stop. She smiled, sadly. Then learn. For them. For me. You kept us alive. Let that be enough just for now. We stood there for a long time, not speaking. Behind us, Olivia was laughing. Sam was drawing on the side of our tent with charcoal from the fire we used to cook. Leah was teaching Kara how to use a field radio. Harold had his feet up, sipping tea for the first time since I'd met him. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were living. And I began to believe, maybe not fully, not yet, but enough to start. It was the third morning since we arrived at the safe zone when everything changed. The loudspeakers crackled to life just after dawn, followed by the same calm voice we'd heard on the radio before. But this time, there was no warning, no evacuation protocol, no grim casualty report. This time, the voice said something else, something we hadn't dared believe anymore. Attention all survivors, vaccine distribution begins today. Those 5 words hit harder than any explosion I'd ever heard. Myra stood beside me, eyes wide. Leah let out a breath like she'd been holding it for weeks. Kara sat down heavily on her cot and just stared at the tent wall. The kids didn't really understand, not fully, but they saw our faces. They felt the shift in the air. It was real. Soldiers came through our sector shortly after, calling names and guiding small groups toward the medical center. There were cheers. Laughter. People crying. I hadn't heard joy like that in what felt like years. When it was our turn, we followed quietly, hands clenched, hearts pounding. They led us into a large white tent with clean plastic curtains and rows of military medics. The children went first. Myra sat beside Olivia, holding her hand. Sam didn't flinch, just looked up at the medic and said, "Does this mean we can go home now?" The man smiled gently. "It means one day you might." When it was my turn, I sat down on the folding chair and rolled up my sleeve. The needle was small. The whole thing took maybe 15 seconds. But as the vaccine entered my bloodstream, something shifted deep in my chest, something unspoken, something I hadn't felt since the outbreak began. Relief. Hope. We were each given wristbands, green ones to mark us as vaccinated and cleared. The next step, they said, was reintegration. Rebuilding. Once the cities were cleared and the infected thinned, the world would begin again. It wouldn't be the same. Nothing ever would. But there would be power. Roads. Schools. Maybe even laughter. That night, after the sun dipped below the broken skyline, I climbed to the top of the stadium, past the guard posts, past the generators, up the rusted scaffolding where I could see it all. The city. Burned. Broken. But still standing. Below, people moved through the tents like ants rebuilding a crushed colony. I could hear children laughing in the distance, soldiers singing to themselves by a campfire, the low drone of a radio playing an old song I hadn't heard in decades. I lit a cigarette I'd been saving since the first week of the outbreak. One of the last in my pack. I don't even know why I kept it all this time. Habit. Or hope. Myra found me up there. She didn't say anything at first. Just sat beside me, her knees pulled to her chest, hair tangled in the wind. We watched the city burn low in the distance, glowing like embers. "You think we'll ever go back?" she asked. I didn't answer immediately. The truth was, I didn't know. Our house was gone. Our neighborhood, probably leveled. The workshop, it might still be standing, but the man who built it had changed. "I think," I said finally, "we'll build something new." She nodded. "You think there'll be ships again? Out there?" She pointed west, toward the coast. "Yeah. Someday. We'll need welders again. You still remember how?" I looked at my hands. Scarred. Burned. Call used. But steady. Strong. I'll always remember. The next morning, we were assigned to reconstruction detail. I was handed a torch and told to report to Sector B, where power lines were being reconnected. They didn't ask if I was ready. I didn't need them to. I walked through the gate with my tool bag slung over one shoulder, boots crunching gravel, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like prey. I felt like a builder again. A welder. A father. A man who still had something to give. There were sparks again, not the kind that flew when monsters crashed through steel, but the kind that meant progress. Purpose. Life. In the days that followed, we worked alongside strangers who quickly became family. We built walls, fixed wiring, taught kids how to use real pencils again. Leah volunteered in the clinic. Kara joined a defense patrol. Harold took over logistics and ration supply. Myra, ever the survivor, helped organize food storage and child care for the new arrivals. Olivia and Sam ran like wild things through the growing compound, laughing, free. They even started a little garden near our new shelter, just 2 rows of carrots and beans, but it was a beginning. Sometimes, at night, I still woke up sweating, thinking I heard them, the infected scratching at the walls. But it was just wind. Just memories. The virus hadn't broken us. Not completely. We'd bent. We'd bled. But we hadn't snapped. And now, in a place made of tents, fences, and tired hands, we were planting the first seeds of something better. Not everything was fixed. But for the first time since the world ended, there was tomorrow.